What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Hey guys, and welcome to the championship edition of the Fantasy Points UFL Breakdown. I'm here as always with Millionaire Maker winner and one of the winningest spring football DFS players of all time, Neil Orfield. And as our YouTube viewers have likely noticed, we've been graced with the presence of former Houston Roughnecks and San Antonio Brahmas offensive coordinator, AJ Smith. AJ, we really appreciate you taking the time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. And hey, before we get started, I just want to tell everybody listening, subscribe to Fantasy Points.
Oh.
And if you don't, you're a dweeb.
I love that.
Let's get this thing started.
I did not tell AJ to do that. He did that.
No, that was me.
So yeah, that was all him. We did not discuss that pre-show at all. AJ, again, super happy to have you on. I'll intro the game here. DC Defenders at the Michigan Panthers. This game will be played in St. Louis, Missouri, but Michigan is technically the home team here. DC is a 3.5-point underdog. The total is 50.5. We will talk about those betting lines here in a bit, but I wanted to pick your brain a little bit, AJ, given that, you're fantastic offensive mind. You definitely understand things about the game that, go over me and Neil's head a little bit. So I wanted to talk a few matchups. And, one of the first things that I spotted when I looked into the matchups for this game is that DC's defense has been the second worst in the UFL by yards per attempt allowed and the worst by yards per carry allowed. They've just given up a ton of explosive plays this season. Do you think this DC defense has any chance to stop Bryce Perkins and the Panthers offense this week?
When I was breaking this down last week, I said numbers lie, right? And the thing with DC's defense, they played down the competition this year, but they're so good, especially in the front seven and their speed in the secondary. The same way they can play down, they can play up. And what they did to St. Louis was no surprise to me. I expected that. I still think one of the best defensive players in this league that people are starting to realize how great he is, but a pass rusher named Derek Roberson, who was originally a 2023 Roughneck who got hurt in our training camp. And we went, we couldn't block him in camp. And guys like him show up. And so, the way they can play up, I totally expect them to play better than what their stats have shown. But to answer your question, they're not going to stop Bryce Perkins in that offense. But they can maintain if they have the proper plan. And the first thing you look at, why did Bryce Perkins and the Michigan Panthers go off in this last game? Man, poor tack. I thought the story of the whole playoff, how bad a tackling job the Birmingham Stallions did. I'm talking about even a receiver catching a slant route going for 80 yards against one of the greatest dynasties in spring football. And so it's simple stuff is, are we going to tackle? Are we going to maintain? And their front seven has the ability to maintain that offense. But if I'm DC, I'm doing this too. I'm going to need some help. I'm going to need some help from the refs. What am I talking about? I hate Michigan Panthers from nothing personal here, from a football philosophy, drop back pass, lover of the air raid offense. I hate RPO illegal offense. And if you go down and just look at their big plays, even in this last playoff game, I'm seeing boom, explosive, and there's a lineman 4 yards down the field. And nobody's throwing a challenge flag. Nobody's saying anything. They constantly have illegal men down the field. So if I'm DC, I'm texting Blandino, who's ever working it. Boop! Hey, here's 20 plays. No one's calling this. We're gonna throw the challenge flag. Hey, and I'm asking them because I did this all the time with the Blandino and those guys because we had access to them. I said, hey, if I challenge this right here, would it get overturned? And they tell you yes or no. So I'm going down these lists of 20 questionable calls because if they do that, you could see a massive play, 40 yards, could flip the whole play. Yep, legal man downfield. So when we talk about ways of winning a championship, all factors are in play.
Yeah, I really like that angle. I think that's particularly interesting. Side note, AJ, I'm curious, how much time would you and your, coaching staff in general spend talking about, what sort of plays you wanted to challenge? What was that process generally like for you guys?
Yeah, that was real simple in the fact that you wanted the play you're challenging to be a game-changing play. And typically why so many coaches keep it for the fourth quarter in a play, and you're looking for something at that point. I mean, there's been instances I can think of, like we threw a pick versus the Dragons 2023. It was a strip pick. It was a weird play, week 5, and we threw it no matter what. Hey, hands to the face, tackle, and I remember later on that year, Arlington lost to DC, but it was fourth and whatever. They threw the flag. Hey, they were holding our tight end. Dude, they got it. And then they ended up going into overtime and losing that game. But that's when you want to do it. And like this year, I thought it was funny. We ran a shallow screen to Anthony McFarland week 2, and he got like 15 yards. And they challenged it, and they won. And it was very Nicky Pick play to do that one. I was like, that's a terrible time to do that. And we ended up actually scoring that drive too. So those are some of the psyche things you're thinking about as far as your challenges.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. I mean, me and Neil have talked about previously how it makes sense to use the challenge on the highest leverage play of the game, especially given the UFL challenge rules where you can challenge any aspect. Let's move on, though, to DC just bringing a ton of pressure. That's impossible to ignore when you watch this team play. And I think one of the more interesting notes that I found is, Bryce Perkins has been phenomenal in every facet, but especially against pressure this year, 105.4 passer rating when pressured. I'm curious if you think there are any particular pass catchers for Michigan who will benefit from DC's blitz-heavy defensive approach.
I know from a fantasy standpoint, it's probably not the answer you want to hear, but all of them. Okay. And I really like Devin Ross and Malik Turner, but what happens when a play breaks down and or he's under pressure, 5-6 man pressure, and heck, they're playing a Blake Williams here. He may bring 7, right?
Yeah.
It leaves everybody one-on-one. And if you look back week 1 when we played DC, they did the same thing to us. It was actually a running back, Anthony McFarland, to bring him up again, caught a swing route, 40-yard touchdown. It was our first touchdown of the season against the blitz. So it benefits everybody. If you're going to be put in a one-on-one situation when those things happen, and whoever wins that one-on-one is going to benefit. And where his eyes happen to be, maybe because it's 4 to the side to the left, he's going to look right, even though you got Malik left or whoever, he's got to go to that one-on-one to the right. And so the receivers, you got to win one-on-one. And with the way, it's going to be interesting because the way DC likes the pressure, I call it punt block. They get all 4 guys, they're in your face. So they're trying to hold you up to make it harder on Bryce to make a decision or possibly throw a contested ball. So some good chess matches will happen right there.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the more interesting elements of this game. Moving over to the DC side of the ball, I'm curious if you think the defenders will have any chance to run the ball here. Obviously, DC just tore up St. Louis on the ground, who, over the course of the season, St. Louis was a fairly efficient run defense, but obviously Michigan is an entirely different animal. Since week 6, just 3 yards per carry allowed by this Michigan front. I'm curious if you think Deion Jackson and Abram Smith will be able to get going here.
Yes, I do. And it's real simple. Because DC's offense is one of the few offenses, maybe the only offense, that you have to cover the entire field in the UFL this year. And when you have to cover the entire field because your pass, a vertical pass and a horizontal pass, the pass sets up the run. And especially due to, Michigan, I even saw this week another injury happen in their secondary. They're going to go into their Tampa 2. They're a Tampa 2 cover 1 team. And when you're a Tampa 2, you're lightening the box. And the thing with DC, they're the best Tampa 2 team in the league the last 3 years. That's like Greg Williams and, son Blake now is a DC. That's when their patented defense, they go back all the way to when he was a DC with the Redskins. You see the same things he did. They know how to master that cover 2. So I say all that because for the last 3 years, that's what their offense has seen. Tiamu and Fred Kais, they see cover 2, Tampa 2 every day. So they will have the answers to know how to run against it. And if they're able to get their pass game going, I expect success in the run game as well.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. Biggest injury note for this game is that Ty Scott is back. He's listed as a backup. He just came back from a broken forearm that he suffered earlier in the year. He's been 7 weeks away from the team during the regular season. Now, AJ, as a coach, I'm curious how much playing time you would expect from a player like Ty Scott, who, again, is returning from injury after a ton of missed time, but it's also the championship game. And I'm sure, his last opportunity, at least for this upcoming NFL season, to show what he has. What would you generally expect from, a player of Ty Scott's caliber returning from a broken forearm in a game like this?
Yeah, this story reminds me of what we went through in the playoffs in 2023 with the Roughnecks, because we were missing our left tackle for like 4 weeks, and he's stud left tackle. But then, he comes back. Well, if you look at our offensive line the last 2 weeks, moving our left guard to left tackle and plugging in another guy, they were grading out B's and A's. Like week 9, all of our offensive line against the Raiders, or excuse me, not Raiders, the Vipers, Las Vegas Vipers, graded out at A's. And then here comes play. It's like, oh, great, we got our left tackle back. Throw him in there. Our chemistry was off. It was off. And it's like, well, dude, we've been rolling this way for 4 to 5 weeks. And on 2, that not only did it mess up chemistry, we threw him back in there. He wasn't necessarily in game shape, right? So you need, and we're not in the building. We don't know to the extent and severity that his injury is. If he's good to go, there definitely needs to be a package to where he comes in and, hey, let's get him involved. But I'd be very cautious to say, okay, yeah, he's back. Let's roll when you're able to get to the championship without him.
Yeah, I'm curious too, when guys are coming back from injuries like this, are you relying like entirely on the training staff for, how to handle them? Are you talking to the player about what the player, sort of wants his workload to be, when he returns? What's sort of the process in determining what the workload should be, when a guy returns from a major injury?
Yeah, that's those are some good questions because they have to go through a protocol,
Mhm.
and hopefully those things are being done the right way, and pass a physical. So once you get to all that and you're actually back on the practice field, it's up to the player and the coach and their discrepancy. I mean, there's been stuff, I thought Wade was the best, that maybe a player was ready to go and he was at 85%, and he would bench him or sit him, and the player's going, well, I'm good. He says, if you're not 100%, you're not playing. Let's wait till next week till you're 100%. That was Wade's philosophy, and a lot of times that was the right call because we could have rushed a guy back out there, got an injury, and prolonged what he was going through. All he needed was another week. So those are kind of things that happen. But now you're at the point where it's the championship game. Hey man, I need 10 plays. You got them, and you're having those conversations.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's certainly helpful. And, AJ, as you can probably tell, as we've acknowledged kind of throughout this interview, we're a fantasy show first and foremost. So for the title game, I just need to ask you point blank, are there any lesser known skill players that you think have a chance to score a ton of fantasy points and impress everybody on ABC this Saturday night?
Yeah, this is a good question. And it really made me think of prior championship games, made me think of Super Bowls where stars can be born. And why is that? Because defenses spend all week trying to take away what you do best, your best player, your best schemes that you do that go to those said players. And typically when that's being done, maybe you double somebody, maybe you overload the box. It's leaving a role player or somebody who's, hasn't been the main guy, but it leaves them one-on-one. And then now those one-on-one opportunities becomes a chance to turn the whole game and win a championship for your team. And so as I look into this, and like I said, I don't see the Panthers playing too much cover 1. Okay. I see a lot of Tampa 2 because of injury in the secondary and the fact that, it's kind of slowed down any type of vertical passing game. They're going to play, Tampa 2 is almost prevent. So I could see being in the slot much easier to find space as opposed to being a wide out and getting jammed and then boom, there's a safety behind you. And then 2, if they do play cover 1-on-one slot fade, corner, touchdown, crossing route. So in saying all this, I could easily see DC's wide receiver Chris Rowland having a 100-yard day, and that would be my sleeper pick.
I love that pick, AJ. AJ, final question before we get to the spread. I do think this is kind of an interesting one from Neil. Obviously the league has sort of interesting travel dynamics where all the teams go back to Arlington during the week and then travel to their respective home stadiums. For a game like this, where, Michigan is technically the home team, but, both teams are going from Arlington to St. Louis, is there any semblance of a home field advantage as having maybe the nicer home locker room, a tangible edge there? Is there anything to that?
Absolutely not. There is none. In fact, we're so used to going to St. Louis and, being in the back of the bus or the plane. And then we knew our locker room pretty well when they flipped it and we had St. Louis like this. Well, it was kind of funny because there was a building or room next to equipment for whatever reason had all this alcohol, right? And now we weren't going to have access to that, and we were all like pissed because when we won in the playoff game, I mean, it was a freaking party. It was like the old 2020 Bud Light seltzers, memes and videos you'd see. And so we were pissed to have the nicer stuff, but as far as competitive advantage or a crowd going one way or another, I will say I felt the crowd was kind of rooting for us because it is more of an XFL fan base there, and there's still some of that XFL, USFL, but it was not of a significance to affect the game.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I'm sorry you guys missed out on that party. Obviously, I'm sure everyone has the gif of Taylor Heineke smashing 2 White Claws together and dumping them into his mouth after a Battlehawks victory back in the 2020 XFL glory days stuck in their head. AJ, now that we have all these great matchup notes, I think it's time to talk about the betting line. Really curious, what do you think of the spread here? DC as a 3.5 point underdog. What are your thoughts?
Man, it's kind of interesting. I'll give this analogy in comparison because as I look at Michigan Panthers, man, I see a lot of us last year, a team that wasn't on the radar early, got some momentum, kept losing to freaking St. Louis, was our Super Bowl to beat St. Louis. And then once we got there, our story was we kind of felt like we'd already won. We had beaten St. Louis earlier in the year. The Stallions early in the years, gave it to them. And, you ask a lot of our players like, Coach, that week we treated it like we already won. I'll take the fact too, what you hope don't happen for back-to-back championship games. Bryce Perkins gets hurt first play of the game, like happened with us with John Levitt. And by halftime, we were missing 7 starters on offense. It was just nightmare championship game. Praying, hey, let's have a great championship. Everyone stays healthy and we have a great game. But in saying all that, I really worry about the psyche of the Panthers getting there, that they've, hey, we've beaten DC. Hey, we were 0-6 against the Stallions, or 0-7 without, including the year without Mike Nolan. We slayed the Giant, and meanwhile, DC could not care. They want to win a championship, and they've been here before. They've fallen short in this position in 2023. And their whole goal is championship or bust. It was not a big deal for them to beat St. Louis. They've done it in the year and multiple times. And in pro football, and the same thing we had to deal with in our mental psyche with this and putting in the back of our head, it is hard to beat a team twice. It is hard to beat a team twice. So in saying that, I like DC money line. I think there's just a complete package. I think Perkins is going to make some plays, and he's exciting to watch. But I think DC's on a different mission, and the fact that their offense is a complete package where they can stretch you all over the field and run, it's no surprise to me that the best 2 quarterbacks in the league ended up in the championship as well.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I really like that as a contrarian angle. I was looking at some of the championship game pricing earlier today. You can get DC plus 145 pretty consistently around the industry. There's probably a 150 out there if you look hard enough. AJ, what about the total here? 50.5. To me, it sounds like you think, both of these offenses actually have pretty solid matchups against their respective defenses. So I'm curious, how that influences your thought on a 50.5 total, which is the highest we've seen all year. It's a pretty hot spring football total.
Maybe this is worth a late fantasy points article 24 hours before the game. I'd be very curious, what are the analytics this season of anything over 50 points that hit the over? Because with it being at 50, just the way our game is designed with a running clock, and even that's a high total. I don't care who's playing. I'd probably take the under because it only takes a few mistakes. And like you've seen games this year, it's 9-7 at halftime. It's 6-3. And what happens is the offense drives the field. They make a mistake in the red zone. Then now they got to drive the length of the field. Now you're in the second quarter. And like even looking back at our championship game last year against the Stallions, we had the ball once in the fourth quarter. So even though it's 2 great matchups, because the rules of a running clock I would go with what I think the analytics would favor with anything over 50 and go with the under, just because you're one or two mistakes away and you got to play perfect. 20 points in the UFL and take it to, you got to get the extra points too, which are 33% chance across the board of getting. Getting over 20 points, we always felt like was really scoring 35, right? So when you start scoring 30 on teams, you're really scoring in the 40s. So for it to be 23, 25, and you're still under, I like the analytics with that.
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly fair, and that might be some late night homework for me to to try to write that article before the championship game starts. But yeah, 50.5 is a monster total for a league, like AJ said, has a running clock. AJ, thank you so much. I mean, this was really, really cool. We really appreciate you coming on. Any final words here before we let you go?
Yeah, real easy. Subscribe. Don't be a loser. Right here. Best in the websites right here. Great UFL coverage. Love it. And appreciate you guys. I've always followed you and your intake on the league and the support, and yeah, hopefully have a great championship.
Yeah, absolutely. We really appreciate you for hopping on, AJ.
Cool.
AJ Smith, San Antonio Brahmas and Houston Roughnecks, former offensive coordinator. Really, really appreciate him for hopping on. Again, AJ, thank you so much.
Yeah, no doubt.
Thank
Thanks.
Neil, that was really cool. That was
cool.
That was a really cool interview. I feel so happy.
I just got to pretend I was AJ Hawk the whole time. I've
I
never had that experience before. It was just amazing.
I thought about messaging you. I was like, I think I'm going to ask all of these questions so you could just be AJ Hawk. But I was like, no, I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to force him into the AJ Hawk mindset. I'd rather have it happen naturally.
No, you're just cooking. I wasn't going to interrupt all of your great questions there.
That was that was really interesting stuff from AJ too. I thought he had some fairly interesting matchup notes there, and it's always cool to hear. Like, I mean, who would have thought that? Like, I had no idea that the Brahmas had an alcohol-fueled rager after their win.
Me neither.
against St. Louis last season in the playoffs. That's really cool to hear. Yeah, wow, I'm so excited. I feel like this is probably the best time for me to say this. Like, doing UFL coverage has been the most professionally rewarding and like cool thing I've ever done in my entire life, and I'm just so grateful that we just had AJ Smith on our show. Like, that's so cool. I get to do this show with a guy who won a Millionaire Maker, who for whatever reason is grinding 5 and 10K to first UFL slates. Like, we got producer Trey, who's showing up 5 minutes before the show, pulling together graphics that he didn't even know he needed. Like, I mean, what an effort from everybody. Like, I don't know. I'm just so happy. I can't thank the viewers enough. Like, obviously I could not do this if it weren't for fantasy points, if it weren't for our subscribers, if it weren't for our lovely YouTube viewers. Like, this is just all so cool. And I feel like after that interview, I'm feeling it very strongly. I was going to save that for the end of the show, but I have to get it out of the way now. Yeah. I can't hold it in anymore.
And you've been doing a great job. And I think all of the subscribers in Discord are always very pleased with the effort that you put in, because you're working harder than anybody at your UFL coverage. So I'm sure that's part of the reason it is so rewarding, because you are grinding all throughout the season.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. It's I feel like one of the most unique things about this for me is that I'm one of the only people in the world, both in like the DFS landscape and in the media landscape, who focuses all their time on the league during the season. So I don't know, and like, who knows, what the future could hold, obviously, but so cool that I've gotten to do this for the past couple of years. Going back to 2022 USFL, I remember Scott Barrett called me one day and we were talking off-season article plans, and I was like, oh, there's USFL contests on DraftKings. Would you be okay if I wrote articles on it? And then he was like, yeah. And I was like, oh shit, I don't even know who any of these guys are. I have so much work I need to do on this league to even put together an article. And now to just be here, interviewing a former, Roughnecks and, Neil's team, Brahma's offensive coordinator. I mean, just so cool. So yeah, I really can't thank all you guys enough for tuning in. And Neil, how about we tackle some DFS analysis? I suppose we should probably start with our thoughts on the betting line. We just heard AJ's thoughts. DC 3.5. I feel like that feels about right to me. This did open at 3, moved to 3.5. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on the betting line. I don't really have a strong take there.
I thought AJ made a good point about just how hard it is to score 50 plus points in a game with the running clocks. That's always been I feel like if you look at our overs and unders that we've taken throughout the year, it's probably 85% unders that we like in these games. And I think, yeah, this is the highest total we've seen. They are good defenses too. So yeah, I think the under seems pretty good to me. I feel like I was inclined to favor Michigan just because I think the value of Bryce Perkins, like I just think he's the best quarterback, and just like betting on the best quarterback is often the way I like to approach these things. But I also think, AJ, maybe I'm not in the locker room, so I don't understand the psychology of like maybe Michigan is satisfied. I guess I don't really know where they are at mentally. So yeah, I'm not going to disagree with AJ if he thinks DC is going to win this one.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting angle. I have bet a little bit on the DC money line, but it's because I have a pretty big Michigan Panthers futures position. Yeah. So I was kind of just hedging some risk a little bit. I'll still stand to win like a decent chunk more if Michigan wins. So they're the team that I want. Yeah, I mean, I don't really hate DC money line if I had to choose on either the spread or the money line. When it comes to the total, I think I'm going to disagree with you and AJ and say that I like the over, if only because all of the, standard fantasy bro stats that I looked into suggested that this is going to be a pretty solid offensive outing for both teams. The area where I had the most doubt was regarding DC's rushing attack. And, after what AJ said, where he seemed pretty optimistic that Deion Jackson and Abram Smith could get going here. That kind of suggests to me that both offenses might be able to really move the ball here. Another thing, even though this total is really high at 50.5, these are two teams that are great at explosive plays. So, we could see a lot of slow, methodical drives, and then all of a sudden, 2 touchdowns in like a minute and a half is certainly a viable path there to maybe get you near the over. And you know what, Neil, I feel the same way about like an over in the biggest game of the year as I do people who are like bearish on like the stock market. Like, I just want to see it happen. Like Bears, I hate them. I want stocks to go up. I want points.
I want the over. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want a fun game here.
Yeah. So I might be emotionally hedging a little bit by saying I want the over too, but I do think these teams will put up a ton of points. Let's get into the game here. Biggest injury note, obviously, Ty Scott's return. We just got AJ's thoughts, and those line up pretty similar to what I was thinking. We will talk about that in a little bit more detail shortly. Just wanted to cover some other notable inactives among the skill players. No Javon Antonio this week for DC. Instead, on the outside, Braylon Sanders, Ty Scott, Cornell Powell, and Seth Williams will all be up. No Ben Bresnahan for DC. So they will only have 2 active tight ends. Mason Fairchild stepping into the tight end 2 role. Briley Moore will continue to be their starting tight end. And then, I mean, this doesn't really matter because he's capped at like 1 snap when he's active, but Darius Higgins is also inactive for DC. On the Michigan side of this game, Matthew Colbert is inactive. We will have Nate McCrary working as Michigan's RB2. And that does it for noteworthy injury stuff there. The Michigan secondary is fairly beat up. They're missing a couple sort of part-time players. Adonis Alexander is back, which is a good note for them. So I'm not punishing them a ton for any of those injuries, but it is worth noting that the secondary has, been, I believe, right behind DC and San Antonio as one of the softest over the second half of the season in terms of like yards per attempt allowed. Again, that's something we will discuss a little bit more later. Neil, let's get into the DFS side of this game. We have 10K to first on DraftKings, by the way, guys. So shout out DK for coming through with a decent prize pool to end the year. I think we got to start with Jordan Ta'amu, who is the most expensive player on the slate. I'm a bit surprised it's not Bryce Perkins, but I mean, it's easy to see why. Ta'amu has been absolutely slinging it this season. He looked really good last week. DC just wasn't forced to really throw. They didn't get pushed much at all. I'm curious what you think about Ta'amu as, either a flex or a captain play this week. Oh, he's muted. We got him. Final episode.
Damn it. Yeah, I think that's the second time it's happened this year. I'm just not used to muting myself. I just don't do it all that often. No, I think Ta'amu is pretty obviously a great play. Like one of the safer plays on the slate. He is going to get a ton of ownership. I think it's warranted. He's going to get 74% ownership. I think we haven't projected at overall. I think I might be a little bit light on that just because we have pretty limited pay down options. So like because we don't have a ton of great pay down options, I worry that like in my Ta'amu lineups, I'm going to be funneled into the same lineups that everybody else wants to play, and it's just going to be too similar to everybody else. So I might actually end up a little bit light on Teamu, but not all. He'll be in more than half my lineups for sure. I think he's obviously a fantastic play. It's a strong matchup. The one question that I've been trying to answer myself with Teamu is, how am I stacking him? And I think regardless of where he is in my lineup, I am going to just require one pass catcher. Often on showdown slates like NFL, or if this were a 200,000 person field, I might require two pass catchers when I have Teamu in the captain spot, just because of the dynamics of the scoring on DraftKings, where anytime the quarterback passes the ball, the receiver outscores the quarterback. So it's difficult for the quarter. They get more points. They get a point per reception. They get more points per yard, per touchdown. So if the quarterback is throwing it too much to just one receiver, it's difficult for that quarterback to be the optimal captain, especially when they are the most expensive player on the slate. So you really need the quarterback if they're going to be the optimal captain. You need them typically, unless they're a rushing quarterback, obviously, you need them to be spreading the ball around so that one receiver does not outscore them and become the optimal captain. But here, because it is such a small field, we don't really need perfection. So I think, willing to just play Teamu with one pass catcher, even in the captain spot.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting angle. And another thing that I was sort of thinking about throughout the week is that we might see DC be a little bit more spread out than a normal week, just given that, Ty Scott's back. They have 4 very competent outside wide receivers. We've seen Seth Williams emerge a little bit. As AJ sort of hinted, they will probably have a specific package for Ty Scott, so that may get him some design targets. Things may be a little bit more spread out here than we've grown used to. Let's talk some DC pass catchers. I really liked AJ's angle that this is, just overall a really good schematic matchup for Chris Rowland. And I mean, he's projecting really, really well for us. We have him for 15.2 DraftKings points. One of the interesting things that I found when I ran ownership is that none of the non-quarterback skill guys are really popping from like a captain ownership perspective. We've got Rowland right around 10%. Toa Tawa right around 10%, Malik Turner at 9%. It's a lot of single digit ownership for these guys. So if you do have a strong take on a skill guy who isn't Bryce Perkins or Teamu, and you want to load up on them in the captain spot, you can gain some great leverage here. Neil, what are your thoughts on Rowland and then maybe some of these other DC guys? Let's talk maybe as captain options first.
Yeah, Rowland at just under 10% projected captain ownership. I think that's a really strong play. I think I'll have more than that of Rowland. Just you get the PPR points. We're predicting what, 100 yard game. Was that today? Did you say that, or am I imagining that?
Yeah, he did. He did.
Yeah, I mean, just the perfect matchup for Chris Rowland. And he's pretty cheap. Like he's I kind of expected him to be more expensive than any of the Michigan receivers. He is cheaper than Malik Turner, just 8,200 in the flex. So yeah, I think the value is there on Rowland. It's a great matchup. I'll be 15-20% probably, a little bit over the field there in the captain spot.
I think that makes sense. And then when it comes to these other DC guys, I think the conversation gets a little bit more interesting. Cornell Powell, I think, is going to be the easiest to talk about. I honestly think, and I wrote it up this way in my article, Chris Rowland and Cornell Powell are very similar to me as like Cioce Mariner and Malik Turner, where, these are guys where the slot guy, Turner or Rowland, has a lot of strong, guaranteed sort of shorter area volume. And then these outside guys aren't earning as many targets, but it's all much deeper down the field. And, they arguably have better ceilings, especially relative to the volume that they earn. I don't think Ty Scott's return to the field is going to impact Powell's snap share too much. I would be really shocked if Cornell Powell was under a 70% route share for this game. With that in mind, Neil, how do you feel about Powell as a captain option? I think he's a pretty good one. Yeah,
and you get lower ownership than Rowland, about 6% ownership on Powell. Yeah, I think again I'll try to be overweight there. Excuse me. I imagine I might come in a little bit light on Jordan Teamu in the captain spot. We talked about him already a little bit, 18%. So I think that's where I'm going to get some of the ownership. Getting to overweight on the pass catchers is that I just think Teamu, I'll be a little bit light on 18%, I would imagine. The field is going to get there a lot, but just it's easy for a pass catcher to outscore the quarterback. And Teamu is so expensive, it's hard to get to a lineup that you really like. So I imagine I'll be a little bit light there, and I think I'll be overweight on his pass catchers, both Powell and Rowland.
Yeah, I think in my Teamu captain teams, we sort of talked about how for him to, be the optimal captain, things might need to be a little bit more spread out. I think in my Teamu captain teams, I'm going to prioritize some of these non-Roland, non-Powell wide receivers, guys like Jaden Mickens, Ty Scott, Seth Williams, even Braylon Sanders, who doesn't project particularly well for us, are all pretty interesting. When you look at that group of four, I think one guy in particular stands out, and it's Jaden Mickens, because we have no question marks as to his role. 43% route share last week, very consistent 48% route share over the full season. He's basically just the backup slot guy who earns about 3.5 targets per game. Unfortunately, he doesn't play in the red zone. But I mean, Neil, if anything happened to Chris Rowland here, Jaden Mickens would be an absolute smash. Not to mention, he's only 3K. And for how he's projecting, he's one of the better values of the slate. Do you think there's any angle to maybe getting to like a Jaden Mickens at captain? I don't really think so. To me, he's mostly just a flex play, but I am curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't think that I get there. You can also double dip there with the DC defense. Hope that he scores a return touchdown. So that's kind of nice with Jaden Mickens. I don't do a ton of the double dip thing, but it's an angle you can play. Play Jaden Mickens with the DC defense and hope for that return touchdown. I probably don't get there as a captain. I mean, he's 0% owned, so there is that. It's just what are the odds that he's going to put up such a high score that you can't overcome it to not have him?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I know this is something we've talked about in previous Showdown slates, but it's something I want people to be sort of cautious of when you do see some of these very cheap guys that project as strong values. When you plug a cheap guy like a Jaden Mickens into your captain, you're almost always going to end up with the same build in your flex spots as everyone else who plugged a cheap guy into their captain, because you say like, oh, I have all this salary. All right, I'm going Teamu, I'm going Bryce Perkins, I'm going Malik Turner, I'm going Cornell Powell. And then all of a sudden you just are duped 50 times, even though you played a very unique captain, which is, always super annoying. So that would be something I'd also keep in mind if you do go the cheap route at captain. Just sort of be cautious of the collective ownership of your flex plays. Okay, Neil, these like more expensive outside wide receivers for DC, Ty Scott, Seth Williams, Braylon Sanders, I have a really hard time projecting, evaluating these guys for DFS tournaments. This is a really tough spot. I really liked AJ's angle, and I think that's true. And that's, roughly how I'm projecting Ty Scott in terms of like, hey, they're probably going to roll up a couple packages for him. I think it sort of makes sense for Ty Scott's future NFL career prospects for him to prove, via 2 to 5 targets that he's healthy, right? NFL teams probably want to see him catch a pass after he broke his forearm 2 months ago. Beyond that, though, I mean, he was out of the building for 7 weeks. And like AJ said, like there could be serious chemistry issues there. To me, that opens the door to Seth Williams potentially still as like a sneaky captain guy who could earn, 60 or so % of the routes and has looked really good on the field. Do you think there's any juice there, or all three of these outside guys just kind of flex plays that you're mixing in?
No, I can see it. I mean, Seth Williams listed as the starter, right? No, Braylon Sanders still listed as the starter. That's interesting.
That was true last week, and Williams still outsnapped him. Sanders also popped up limited earlier in the week with an ankle issue. So they'll probably be even at like in terms of routes in like the worst case. And I kind of think Seth Williams is just a better player.
Yeah, no, I think he's a fine, like he's coming at 2% ownership. I think that's a reasonable amount of ownership, a captain for Seth Williams, and 11%. I mean, overall, the ownership on Seth Williams is pretty nice. Just 13% total ownership going to Seth Williams, and he may retain that bigger role. I also like Ty Scott. Like I think, like AJ is obviously correct that like that could be the case that they're just going to give him limited snaps. But you often see with like receivers in particular, they won't play that many snaps, but when they're out there, they're just like the plays are designed to get them the ball. And Ty Scott is probably their best receiver. He also does have pre-existing chemistry with Jordan Teamu. They've played together for years now. So I do think that there are he could surprise us with the amount that he plays and with the amount of action that he sees in the plays that he's in. He also could surprise us in that he just doesn't actually play. Like he's just like the backup receiver and doesn't get in the game because he's not actually healthy. So I think there's just a really wide range of outcomes for Ty Scott. And in that case, I kind of let the ownership dictate what I'm doing. And 11% total ownership is what we're projecting for, again, one of the best receivers on one of the best offenses in the UFL. So I'll be overweight to 2% on Ty Scott in the captain spot. I'll be overweight overall on Ty Scott and just accept that, yeah, he could be a dead spot in my roster, but there's clear upside there.
Yeah, and I think, the bull case for a guy like Ty Scott is, one, he's played in this offense for 2 years. Like you said, Neil, he already has that chemistry with Jordan Teamu. He should know all the plays. Like, even if they did do some new installs during the season, it probably won't be a ton in that regard. I also think it's worth noting, like, it's not like he's coming back from a grade 2 MCL sprain or a high ankle. He had no lower body issues. This was a broken forearm. If his hands still work, his legs should be getting him open. I could see, him pushing for a 60 to 70% route share, but like Neil said, he could also be out there for 15% of routes and earn, one target or maybe a little bit more, or a little bit less than that. The range of outcomes here is huge. So, if you're making multiple lineups, I would want some Ty Scott exposure, but I'm not sure I want to go too overboard, the projected ownership that we have. I do think he's a pretty intriguing captain play if he does end up playing a ton, and he's a little bit interesting as a flex as well, just a little expensive, and that will help suppress his ownership, I think. So I probably won't end up bumping his flex ownership a ton there. All right, Neil, let's talk these running backs. If you just looked at last week's weighted opportunity, you'd say, oh, things were a little bit more even than I might have expected. Deion Jackson at 62% of backfield weighted opportunity, Abram Smith at 38%. That said, I mean, that game really needs context. DC beat the brakes off of St. Louis last week. That was a massive, massive win. If we exclude the fourth quarter, and, anyone who watched this game could tell, it was mostly Abram Smith in the fourth quarter. DC had just taken their foot off the gas. The game was over by then. Deion Jackson recorded 17 of 23 opportunities. That's 74% in the first 3 quarters. And that's roughly what I expect this week, about 70 to 75% of touches going to Deion Jackson. Neil, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on Deion Jackson as a captain option? Because I think that's the more interesting discussion here.
Yeah, and Deion Jackson just absolutely buried me last week. He clearly has some juice, and he's done well in bad matchups before, so I think he clearly can do it. So I'm like, I want to just keep. I'm like, man, the matchup is so bad. I want to bet on the passing game more, but he's coming in at just 2.3% captain ownership. I mean, that in particular looks really good. Like, running backs, you're not reliant on anybody else. Like a receiver, you usually want to get the quarterback in there as well. The running back scores his points, doesn't need to bring anybody else along with him. So I think Deion Jackson just looks like a fantastic contrarian captain option. One of the better, maybe the best contrarian captain option on the board. Yeah, looks great there. I'll probably be underweight overall, but overweight in the captain spot is how I kind of think I'll end up going there.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting angle where, as a flex play is not particularly compelling, but you can absolutely see a ceiling there, especially after getting sort of a bit of a green light from, AJ's offensive mind in terms of like, look, Michigan's allowed 3 yards per carry, but that doesn't matter as much against DC, given that, like AJ said, they have to defend the entire field against the DC defenders. So I do like that Deion Jackson as a really strong contrarian captain option angle. I think that's solid there. Abram Smith to me is really just a flex play, and one that I would pretty much, I don't want to say exclusively, but mostly use in lineups where I'm anticipating a pretty big DC victory. I think Abram Smith correlates pretty well to the DC defense. That's not a correlation that I ran before this game because Abram Smith has barely scored any fantasy points this season. But in the event that DC wins by like 20 points, which is unlikely but possible, I think Abram Smith would get a lot more run and could push for, say, like 12, 13, 14 touches in a game like this. What do you think about Abram Smith as a flex play?
Yeah, I agree. I'm not playing him in the captain spot, even though we've got him at 0% captain ownership. I often am intrigued by those guys, but I don't really think I can get there with Abram Smith. But I think he's a fine, still contrarian flex play at 6,800 seems fine to me. Not somebody I'm going to be having a ton of, but he's as likely as anybody in his ownership range to just like score a touchdown and have 20 yards. Like, Deion Jackson runs it down to the 2, gets caught, he's tired, they bring in Abram Smith for the rushing touchdown. You see it all the time. So those backup running backs on these showdown slates are pretty valuable. He is expensive, so that's the thing. That's like, if he were 4,000, I'd be pretty intrigued, but it's pretty expensive for a clear backup running back who might not see much action. But yeah, you can pair him up with the DC defense, and I think that's a strong way to play it.
Yeah, I definitely like the like if you are playing for a DC blowout, I definitely like the both running backs plus DC defense. Maybe a Teamu
Yep.
wide receiver and then throw a Michigan guy in there, something like that. Tight ends, Neil. Bradley Moore, I think, is a pretty strong flex play as a value. I don't really think he's captain viable to me. Sort of similar to like what we talked about with Jaden Mickens. I just don't love playing these super cheap guys as a captain. But I mean, as a flex play, I think Bradley Moore's pretty great. I think especially on teams where you play Teamu in the captain spot, Bradley Moore as a flex is really, really interesting because he'll be pretty heavily used in the red zone with no Ben Bresnahan. I believe he was third on the team in red zone targets this year. Definitely good touchdown upside there, even if he doesn't offer you much after the catch or in terms of standalone target value. Where are you at on Bradley Moore?
Yeah, seems like a fantastic play with Ben Bresnahan out. We would expect Bradley Moore to step back into a full-time role. I might get to a little bit at the captain spot just because we do have him coming in at 0% ownership. So I like him better than Abram Smith just because he's a little bit more likely, just as like the tight end on a great offense, more likely to score a touchdown and have 30 yards. And he's cheap enough that you can then fit a lot of better players into that. I agree with you. Like you have to worry about running into the same line as everybody else, but you can also leave $500 on the table and avoid being duped by anybody else in the field. So I think he's viable as a captain option, but yeah, obviously gonna have him more as a flex option, and 21% ownership seems totally fine. I think I'll be with or over the field there. Again, we don't have that many great cheap options, and he's one of the best as far as the cheap options go. So yeah, I will have a lot of Bradley Moore.
For sure. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And like Neil said, it's not terribly difficult if you do play one of these cheap kind of contrarian captains to get a little different. And the field's only 1,700 people. I guess I would just be a little hesitant to play like Bradley Moore with then the next five best projected players that you can fit in, because that does seem pretty likely to get duped here. Only other guy that I wanted to mention on the DC side. Oh, well, I guess, Neil, we do have to talk about kickers and defenses. Mason Fairchild is going to be occupying the tight end 2 role. I really don't expect much volume for him, but we have him projected for 1.5 points. He's 1,000. I think as like a throwaway flex play, it's not the worst. I think he's fine. Not a guy that I want a ton of exposure to. We only have him projected for 5% ownership. Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. If you play 52 lineups, you might want him in 2 of them, and that's probably good.
Yeah, that is probably where I will end up. Okay, kicker and defense. This has never been my area of expertise. I rarely have much to offer beyond what you can sort of infer based on our projections. I do think if you're debating between kickers, like gun to my head, I would pick Matt McCrane over BT Potter. McCrane has shown more upside. I think he's the better kicker overall. I believe I included in my article, McCrane has 4 games this year of double-digit DraftKings points. BT Potter has not scored more than 7. Obviously a game could play out in a way where BT Potter gets to 12 and McCrane only ends up with 3. But I do think McCrane is the slightly better option at kicker. Let's just talk about both defenses now. How are you sort of approaching like your defensive exposure for this slate?
Yeah, let me look at the ownership on the defenses, and I agree with you. I was looking at the kickers a little bit earlier, which I don't usually do, but it's unique in the UFL because it's like, is this guy a complete zero, or like, do I need to consider him? And I think Matt McCrane, at least you need to at least consider, because he does have several of those double-digit fantasy point scores, and he's going to be low owned. And I hate playing kickers in UFL since they don't even get extra points, but sometimes you do just randomly get like 4 field goals. As far as the defenses, love them. I mean, DC defenders at 4.3% total ownership. Yeah, sign me up for that all day. That looks fantastic. Michigan Panthers 5. Yeah, I'll be significantly overweight on both defenses here. I get it. They're both playing against 2 of the best offenses in the league, but you see it at the NFL level. Patrick Mahomes will throw a great pass, bounces off the receiver's hand, defense catches it, gets in for a pick 6. The games move fast. Weird things happen in football all the time, and people really tend to underestimate how often these weird things happen. And I think defenses often are the beneficiary of things just going haywire. So yeah, at this level of ownership, I will be at least triple the field on both defenses.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting angle, and I am sort of really glad that you said that, it's obviously tough, like just from a median projection standpoint. We take into account how many points we expect both teams to score. We also take into account how many turnovers, fumbles, interceptions, sacks, what have you, we expect, these opposing offenses to commit. This is a very high total game, and these are two very efficient offenses that don't turn the ball over. I mean, Bryce Perkins especially, doesn't take any sacks, doesn't throw any interceptions. That's why these defenses don't project well. I think in my own stuff, when I upload our projections into an opto, I probably will bump up the defenses by a point or two, just so that I get some exposure there. I probably won't end up with any captain defense. I don't think I want to live in a world, Neil, where I lose to a captain defense lineup. But as flex plays, I think they're both fairly compelling. I said it in my article, especially within particular builds. It's very easy to build for, say, a double-digit point Michigan victory, where you do use the Michigan defense, and maybe you use both running backs, or Toatawa plus Bryce Perkins, something like that. I think those builds are solid in particular. Are there any particular rules that you're using in Showdown slates when you build with defenses, or is it just kind of whatever lineup they end up in?
No, I expand. I'm willing to play the defense as the only player on a certain team, and then have five from the other team. Yeah, I'm willing to do really weird stuff with the defenses in Showdown. They actually yes, they correlate negatively with, or I assume they correlate negatively with the opposing quarterback, but there are scenarios where it's just the defense gets a pick six, the quarterback loses 1 point there, and they get the ball right back. And now they're in a better situation for passing the ball. So I'm not really sure. I've not run any kind of correlations with quarterback and opposing defense, that kind of stuff. I would assume there's negative correlation there, but within a single game, it can work out that if the defense is actually scoring touchdowns, might not be quite as negative there. So I don't really have any strict rules with the defenses. You can, if you wanted to bump up a Chris Rowland to Jaden Mickens, I'm trying to think who are the returners on Michigan. I forget, but if you wanted to give a little bump there, you can. But I don't typically.
Yeah, Michigan's returners are. It's going to be Xavier Malone for both.
That's right.
Devin Ross will be helping out a little bit on kick returns. I don't know if Xavier Malone has enough standalone value that you would want to bump him up there.
Because you only get 6 points. You don't even get you don't get a reception or anything even. So
yeah, exactly. I think the only other thing that I wanted to say about defense was, if we were talking about a week 7 regular season 1 or 2K to first Showdown slate, I would be but if Bryce Perkins throws a pick six, he might get benched. That's not going to happen here.
No.
He just won the MVP a couple hours ago. I think there's no way Bryce Perkins gets benched. We know Te'amu will not get benched.
No.
There's no way they're going to DeLeo. So I think that kind of shores up the quarterback versus opposing defense if you do end up with that in some of your builds. Neil, let's talk about the MVP, Bryce Perkins. I mean, this guy has been absolutely electric. I did think it was interesting when AJ Smith noted that, DC's defense tends to play both up and down to competition.
Yeah.
Maybe that gives Perkins a little bit of trouble, but like I noted, he's been fantastic against pressure. He has been absolutely insane running the ball this season. 0.48 missed tackles forced per attempt. These are 2021 Deebo Samuel numbers. I know this is the third or fourth time that I've said it, but it's absolutely insane. Over 5.5 yards after contact per attempt. That's I don't even know if prime Nick Chubb got that close to, in terms of yards after contact per attempt. This is just incredible rushing that we've seen for Bryce Perkins. And he's looked great as a passer too. Like I've noted, barely any interceptions this season. League's second highest passer rating behind only Jamar Smith, who just absolutely balled out in the final few weeks. Bryce Perkins has been awesome. He's easily going to be the highest owned player here. He's not priced like he's been as good as he has. Neil, what are your thoughts on Perkins? Because I imagine I'm going to have a ton of Bryce Perkins exposure.
Yeah, and the field is also, we've got him at 97% projected ownership here. So I'll probably be light on 97%, mostly because of the ankle concern. He didn't look right last week. So I'm still a little bit, I was nervous the whole game. As somebody who had 52% Bryce Perkins in my lineups last week, the whole game, I was oh God, are they going to just injure him on that ankle? Any one of these plays. I think I'll probably be, and he's fairly expensive, but he's $1,000 cheaper than Jordan Te'amu. There's no world in which he should be $1,000 cheaper than Jordan Te'amu. He'll be in most, almost 100% of my lineup. So I'll probably, give myself 5 outs that don't have Bryce Perkins in them, in case he gets injured or something. But no, he's fantastic. Does it through the air, does it on the ground. There's one thing to play up to the level of an opposing offense, but you can't play up to the level of Bryce Perkins. He's just better than the opposing defenses. So, I think Perkins is a very clearly fantastic play, and he's somebody that I'm probably not going to force in any kind of pass catcher when I have him in the flex. I probably will still require at least one pass catcher from the Panthers when I have Bryce Perkins at captain. I don't think you necessarily need to, like if you think you can just full on do it through on the ground this week. But I think that I am going to require a pass catcher just because he, most likely, if he puts up a score big enough to be the captain that you want, he's probably going to throw at least one touchdown or have many 100 yards through the air. So I probably will require at least one pass catcher.
Yeah, I think that that makes sense. I do agree with you that I think I might cap my flex exposure slightly just in case he re-injures that ankle. On the ankle, for those of you who didn't watch the game last week, it looked to me like he was a little gimpy, like the top end speed wasn't there, but oh my God, the agility and the contact balance were absolutely there. He was still shredding guys in the open field. Like even Bryce Perkins at 80% is still by far the best player in the UFL. It's insane how good he is. And I'm really excited to see what NFL team he ends up signing with, because I would be very shocked if he didn't at least make a practice squad. I think he could fight for a QB2 spot
100%,
on a lot of these rosters. Like get Drew Lock away from my TV, get Bryce Perkins like on, whatever team. I don't care. Just get him in the league, get that man paid. All right, Neil, let's talk pass catchers. As I already said, Malik Turner, COC Mariner, a pretty solid parallel to what we're seeing with Chris Rowland and Cornell Powell on the other side. I will say that I think Mariner's route share is a little bit more secure than, Powell's, given that Ty Scott's returning and we do have 4 outside receivers, and DC seems to pretty clearly like all of them. But yeah, Neil, I'm curious on your thoughts on both Mariner and Turner. I think I like Turner a little bit more as a flex option and Mariner a little bit more as a captain option. Mariner's at 10.3 yards per target over the season, which is by far the most of any player in this game. What do you think, Neil?
Yeah, I love both his options. And I should say, because I need to, again, find ways to get higher on these guys, I probably will actually end up a little bit light on Bryce Perkins in the captain spot, since he's getting 29% projected ownership there. I might be a little bit light on that. I usually, like for NFL, I'll set my cap at 20% and really try to spread out my captain exposure. I don't know if I'll go quite that low, but I probably will be light on the 29% Bryce Perkins and be overweight on his captains. I think both look, Turner at 9% ownership in the captain spot seems pretty good to me. Mariner at just 8% seems really good to me. So I like your breakdown. I do think Mariner, especially with the price savings, does seem like the better captain option, the one that I'd be more likely to be more overweight on. But I like both quite a bit, both in the captain spot and the flex, two of the clearly better plays on the slate.
Yeah, and if any of you guys are looking for bets, I've basically never given out anything from ESPN Bet on this show because those lines move so fast. But DraftKings gave Malik Turner 17-1 to score the first touchdown, which I like a lot. I bet that through a friend. Yeah. He's also 18-1 to score 2+ touchdowns, and he has been fairly utilized in the red zone here. And we saw the big playability last week against Birmingham. I mean, that run after the catch was awesome last week. So if you want a little bit of Malik Turner action, you can head over to DraftKings and grab those two. Definitely like those. All right, Neil, something sort of weird happened last week with Jalen Moore, and I'm not exactly sure what it was, but he didn't run the full-time route share that we've grown accustomed to. Jalen Moore was only at 54% of routes. Devin Ross was at 50% of routes. I said in my article that I'm not really sure what to make of this. I think Jalen Moore is just a better receiver than Devin Ross. Devin Ross has been with the Michigan Panthers for 3 years. He's only ever really been used as like a returner, as sort of like a gimmicky type wide receiver. But I do sort of openly wonder, with Xavier Malone now occupying these return duties, maybe that frees up, the coaching staff to say like, hey, Devin Ross can play outside wide receiver. And it's not like Jalen Moore has been amazing. Like Jalen Moore hasn't been so good that you're like, oh, we need to keep Jalen Moore on the field. Neil, what do you make of this? Like, what do you think of Jalen Moore? What do you think of Devin Ross? Because I do think this is one of the trickier spots to decipher this week.
Yeah, Jalen Moore, like when I was just looking at the prices to see like, okay, who can I play that is cheap that's going to allow me to play all the players I want to pay up for. Jalen Moore was like the first to stand out to me at 3,600. It's like, okay, he's a starting receiver.
Yeah.
He's been targeted, I think, 5 times each of the past 3 games, including the last game when his route share was down, still targeted 5 times. I think he looks like a fantastic option. Only 23% total ownership. I think that's a strong number that I'll probably come in overweight on. But when factoring in ownership, like we have to at least consider that Devin Ross, maybe they have decided like, okay, Jalen Moore hasn't really done much this season. And Devin Ross, former NFL receiver, been in the league a long time. Maybe we need to give him a little bit more work, and 4% projected ownership overall for Devin Ross at 2,400 seems really good to me. Like that is one of the value players that I think I will take a pretty significant overweight on the field stance. So again, I want to get to the pay up guys. Difficult to do with so limited options. I think that those are 2 of the stronger options on the slate, but Devin Moore probably the one that I actually end up, or sorry, Devin Ross probably the one that I actually end up more overweight to the field. I don't know if I'll be overweight to Jalen Moore. I probably will be, but
Yeah,
definitely Devin Ross.
I do definitely like that angle for Ross. I think, I said this in my article. I think it's very possible that Jalen Moore just returns to like 75% of routes, and Devin Ross is sort of
true.
a bit of an afterthought. That could just be a 1 week sort of blip. But yeah, I do like your angle there. I think the other like note for Devin Ross, and this is purely anecdotal, I didn't have time to check the stats, but like when I just think about the targets that he's gotten, it's mostly been screens and then a couple deep targets. For a guy at his price tag, if they connect on one of those deep targets, or if he has a big play off one of those screens, that's that's fairly compelling, I think.
Yeah.
So I do want some Devin Ross exposure. Yeah, I definitely like that angle. I said it in my article. I don't think Samson Nakua is playable at 4K. He's a guy who's been permanently capped at like 15% of routes. Even in the games that didn't matter, they weren't giving Samson Nakua routes. I don't know what the deal with that is. But if you are a DC fan, I would definitely not talk shit to Samson Nakua because he can hit.
Not recommended. Yeah,
he can hit. Xavier Malone, any interest in a 1K returner who's probably capped at 10% of routes? I think no.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay. And then these tight ends, I forget if I mentioned this at the top of the show. No Jalen Weidermeyer. He doesn't take many routes, but it is just going to be Gunnar Oaks and Cole Hicatini serving as Michigan's tight ends this week. I thought it was interesting. Gunnar Oaks actually ran more routes last week. Oaks was at, 61% of routes. Cole Hicatini was at 50%, but Hicatini dominated in targets with 6 for a 25% target share. That was actually his highest target share of the season, Neil. I feel like people are going to be a little too eager to play Hicatini just looking at the game logs from last week. But I mean, it was obvious watching the game that they were making an effort to target Hicatini. I do think that may have been something specific that they saw against Birmingham. So I'm curious where you fall on these tight ends, but I'm a little inclined to think that Oaks is maybe a bit of a better option. Granted, we have Hicatini at 19% ownership, Oaks at 12 in the flex. I can't really be super nitpicky about either of those numbers. What do you think?
Yeah, both seem like fairly strong options to me. I guess I don't have a strong take on
Okay.
which of them is the better option. You're just kind of hoping for a touchdown or just like a few receptions for 40 yards, and that's enough at their price tag. But yeah, I think both, particularly, going against the blitz heavy DC defense, you'd think that a tight end, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but in my mind, I think shorter passes, tight end a little bit more likely to just run shorter routes and maybe be the safety valve for the quarterback a little bit. Yeah, I think both seem like fairly strong, low owned, cheap options. I'm not going like crazy with them. I don't know that I'll be significantly overweight to the field, but I think I'll be at least with the field. Oaks in particular at 1,800 at 12% ownership. That number, I guess, does stand out to me a little bit more than 19%, 4,800. So I do think Oaks probably the better option there.
Yeah, like you said, really just banking on falling into the end zone there. And Michigan does like to use their tight ends in the red zone. I did think it was interesting. Like I sort of thought that too, intuitively. Like, oh, when quarterbacks are pressured, you just go quick to the safety valve. League wide, and I should look into this for NFL because this might be like an interesting article or something. But league wide in the UFL, average depth of target actually goes up against pressure. Bryce Perkins' average depth of target goes from 8.5 yards to about 11.3 against pressure. And I think, like AJ Smith highlighted, you get a lot of one-on-ones, especially on the outside against pressure. So I think especially more talented quarterbacks, more cerebral quarterbacks, like I'm sure Perkins is, they see that one-on-one matchup and they're like, all right, I'm just going to throw it up. I know I won't have much time, but at least I can get it downfield, give my guy a chance for a long explosive play. So actually that's something that does make
go Devin Ross.
Yeah, Devin Ross,
COC
Mariner, like those guys, like the high ADOT guys for Michigan in particular, I think are a little interesting. Let's see. I think we need to talk running back, and then we should have just about everything covered here. Like I said, no Matthew Colburn this week. I do think it's worthwhile noting that Toa absolutely dominated usage last week. 77% of backfield weighted opportunity, 9 of 10 red zone opportunities, including everything inside the 10, everything inside the 5 for Toa last week. Now, Neil, we know Michigan does trust Nate McCrary a little bit more inside the 5, inside the 10 relative to Matthew Colburn, but it was also interesting. Colburn dominated in route share last week. And keep in mind, these backfield routes aren't worth much. Bryce Perkins barely throws to running backs, only at about an 8% rate. But I do think, when I ran the projections, I expected McCrary will ding Toa projection, by a half point, maybe a couple points. It actually ended up not really moving because I gave Toa a little bit more receiving work. I don't think they trust McCrary as a pass catcher nearly as much as Colburn. Colburn was at a 61% route share last week. Toa only at 32%. You look back at some of these games where Taua and McCrary played together. It was, especially later in the season, generally Taua who is earning more routes. Yeah, Neil, what do you think of Toa, first of all? Because I think he's, obviously a great captain, probably a great flex play as well.
Yeah, I think Toa is my favorite captain play on the board. Again, you don't need to pair him up with anybody. He scores his points independent of anybody else. Great workload, really strong matchup with DC. Like everything looks great for Toa. So yeah, that 9% too light. I'll be double the field there at least, I would say, on Toa. One of my clear favorite captain options and flex. We have them, just 45% total ownership, 36% in the flex. I'll be overweight, I think, in both spots on Toa. And then Nate McCrary, we have as fairly contrarian, which is pretty intriguing just because of, the price tag, the matchup. I like the idea of playing them together, Taua and Nate McCrary. I think you can play them in the same lineup and just, say, hey, what if Michigan just runs all over this DC defense? Nate McCrary, worth noting, Nate McCrary listed as out on DraftKings right now, which is helpful. Ty Scott also listed as IR. I always love those because anybody hand building might be a little bit afraid to click those names, even though we know that they're not actually out. So yeah, I think Nate McCrary intriguing in that way. I'm not going to have a ton of Nate McCrary, but I'll have a bit.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. He is a little intriguing, and I think Michigan in particular is very capable of just slowing the game down, absolutely pounding the rock on the ground, and that could certainly benefit a guy like Nate McCrary. To me, he's pretty much just a flex play. I especially like him in lineups that anticipate any sort of like a big Michigan win.
Yeah,
like my lineups that have, say, 5 Michigan players will probably be more likely to have a Nate McCrary. But yeah, I think all of that makes a ton of sense here. Neil, I think we have officially talked about everybody for the championship game. Do you have any sort of like final parting strategy thoughts? Just in general for Showdown. Obviously, these are pretty unique slates relative to like a main slate where we have 8 teams to deal with. So yeah, I was curious if you have any like final strategy notes before we get out of here.
Yeah, so I do a ton of NFL Showdown content. It's different in the UFL because it is such a small field. So a lot of the rules where I usually, like for NFL, I'm always a big proponent of getting really weird and what like double running back, I think, is typically going to be underutilized by the field because people just want to say, no, this is the running back who's going to do well for this team. They don't play both running backs from the same team. But I still think that is probably going to go underutilized in UFL contests. You don't need to be perfect. So again, a lot of the rules that I try to follow in NFL Showdown, like a Jordan Ta'amu non-rushing quarterback in the captain spot, I want to have multiple pass catchers. I kind of throw those out the window here just because I know I don't need to be perfect. You can leave some salary on the table. Often in Showdown as a way to make sure that your lineups are not duplicated, or at least are not the lineups that are going to be duplicated 100 times. Or I guess in this contest, you'd be trying to avoid 12 lineups having the same. being duped 12 times. So yeah, I think you try to be a little bit unique in Showdown contests, but because the field is smaller, it is a little bit different than NFL Showdown. So I'm not trying to leave 1,500 on the table unless if you really like your lineup and it leaves 1,500 on the table, I would not upgrade it. I would just say like, all right, I'm going to run this, but I'm not forcing that in a slate this size. But I do think it's probably a good idea for most of your lineups to leave a little bit of salary on the table, like $400, $600, just to avoid the most duped lineups.
Yeah. And if you are going to use like the full salary, generally I am trying to force in, maybe a lower owned flex player or two. I think that's sort of the easiest way to go about it. But it is important to keep in mind that you don't need to get crazy. Like you don't need to play Gunnar Oaks and Devin Ross in the same lineup by any means. This isn't an NFL Showdown where, like Neil said, you need to be perfect because you're competing with, a couple 100,000 other lineups. Only 1,700 entries, Neil. And if you finish first, you get 10K. Of course, first place, wide open. I have dibs on second, as always.
I got third.
Right,
on lock.
There we go. But Neil, how about you tell people like where they can find you, what you're going to get up to this offseason? Because, after this game, I imagine a lot of our viewers, and especially us, will be transitioning into getting ready for the NFL season, which is, right around the corner at this point. So what do you have on deck?
Yeah, so I've already been doing some of my NFL best ball content on my YouTube channel, the Flannelverse. I've been doing regular Wednesday shows. I get on some great guests. I believe Scott Barrett was on my first show on that channel. I think he's the only fantasy points guy that I've got so far. Jake always tells me he needs a little time before he wants to get in NFL. He's just so in the UFL streets that he's not studying NFL yet, and he's not willing to come on until he's studied. But at some point this summer, I imagine Jake will join me on my channel as well to do some NFL best ball content. But I do that every Wednesday throughout the summer. I've already started those streams. I'm starting to do more like short form content, kind of working through some plans for some short form content. That's essentially it for the rest of the summer. For if you want some football content, check it out, the Flannelverse YouTube channel.
I always love Neil's content. I think it's great fun to watch. And I'm certainly excited to join him. I will say, Neil, I do some NFL studying. I still keep up. But when people good. I have like 3 or 4 pending, NFL best ball show invites right now. And I've told everybody like I need a few weeks because I could not tell you who the Broncos wide receiver 5 is. And until I can do that, I feel like there are other people out there who have been grinding best ball who deserve a guest spot a lot more than I do. So that's the main reason I sort of push it back. And also I do want to take a little bit of time off to do some traveling after UFL ends. On my end, I'm sure I'll pick up plenty of NFL stuff here in July. I know I want to join Ryan Heath and Grant Barfield on that best ball show. Of course, I'll join Neil on his lovely best ball show at some point. And then I'll have, some of my regular offseason articles, maybe like a QB positional target tendencies. I was also thinking about something on maybe long shot NFL futures. I saw Scott Barrett bet Travis Hunter 200-1 to win MVP. And everyone in the comments was basically telling him to kill himself. And that inspired me. I was like, oh, maybe I could come up with a few more of these, write a whole article about this stuff. Yeah, exactly. Keep an eye out for any of my NFL content. That'll probably really get going here in July. But guys, I mean, really can't thank our viewers enough for tuning in all season to the UFL breakdown. This has been quite the joy for me. Hopefully that came off when I was, talking about just how grateful I am after AJ was on. This has been absolutely fantastic. And for the last time this year, we will see you all at the top of the leaderboards. What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.